The receipt lay on the table like a quiet accusation. Not torn, not smudged, not forgotten. Just blank. 0 written neatly on the tip line. No cash tucked beneath the edge. No hurried apology. Just nothing. For Marisol Hayes, standing beside the booth with a tray balanced against her hip, the silence of that empty line felt louder than the clatter of plates and the low murmur of conversations filling the diner. The Cedar Ridge diner was alive in the way it always was during late afternoon. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. A radio hummed softly behind the counter. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, casting long stripes across the black and white tiled floor. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary moment. To Marisol, it felt like the weight of the entire day had finally settled on her shoulders. She inhaled slowly, the way she'd taught herself to do when disappointment threatened to spill over. This wasn't new. She had learned early on not to expect generosity, not to assume kindness. Still, it always stung a little, not because she felt entitled to anything, but because each empty tip line echoed the same message life had been sending her for years. You can give everything you have, and it still might not be enough. Marisol was 27, though most days she felt far older. She was a single mother to a 4-year-old girl named Ella, the center of her universe and the reason she woke up every morning even when her body begged for rest. Her life ran on routines stitched together with effort and quiet determination. Every dollar had a purpose. Every hour was accounted for. There was no room for mistakes. Her day had started before sunrise, as it always did. She'd packed Ella's backpack with snacks and coloring books, kissed her sleepy forehead, and walked her next door to Mrs. Donnelly's apartment. Mrs. Donnelly was retired, widowed, and endlessly kind. She never made Marisol feel like a burden, even when Marisol was late paying her a few extra dollars for watching Ella. Kindness like that was rare, and Marisol held on to it carefully. By the time she tied her apron and stepped onto the diner floor, exhaustion had already wrapped itself around her like a second skin. She wore it quietly, the way she wore everything else. Customers didn't need to see the cracks. They needed hot food, warm coffee, and a polite smile. That afternoon had been relentless. The lunch rush lingered longer than usual, and by the time it thinned out, Marisol's feet ached and her head throbbed. She moved from table to table on instinct, her hands knowing what to do even when her mind drifted toward bills and grocery lists and the rent notice taped to her fridge. Then he walked in. He didn't announce himself or draw attention. He didn't check his phone or sigh impatiently. He simply entered the diner, tall and composed, wearing a tailored coat that looked out of place among the vinyl booths and chipped countertops. There was something about him that shifted the room, not dramatically, just subtly, like a change in air pressure before a storm. Marisol noticed because she noticed everything. It was part of survival. She watched as he chose a booth near the window, sat down, and opened the menu without urgency. His movements were calm, deliberate. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being listened to. She approached him the same way she approached everyone else, with respect, with professionalism. She poured his coffee before he asked, noticed when his cup dipped below half, and returned with a refill without interrupting his thoughts. When she asked if he needed anything else, he looked up and smiled faintly, as if surprised to be noticed at all. He ordered simply. He spoke softly. He thanked her every time she came by. Marisol checked on him more than usual. Not because he demanded it, but because something about him felt distant, introspective, the kind of person who carried thoughts heavier than his plate. She asked once if everything was all right. He nodded and said it was perfect. His name, printed later on the credit card slip, was Grant Hollowell. It meant nothing to her then. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't know his name appeared in business magazines or that his decisions moved markets. To her, he was just another customer passing through Cedar Ridge. When he finished eating, he placed his utensils neatly together, slid out of the booth, and walked toward the register. He paid without comment, nodded politely in her direction, and left the diner without another word. That was when Marisol saw the receipt. 0. Her chest tightened, not with anger, but with that familiar, sinking feeling. She thought of Ella's worn shoes, of the daycare payment already overdue, of the way she calculated groceries down to the cent. She reminded herself again that kindness wasn't transactional. She wiped the table carefully, stacking the plates the way she always did. But when she lifted the plate, it caught. Something beneath it resisted. Marisol paused. She lifted the plate again, slower this time, and saw a folded piece of paper tucked neatly under the edge. Her name was written on it in careful handwriting. Just Marisol. No last name, no explanation. Her heart began to race, not with fear, but with a strange, almost sacred curiosity. She slipped the note into her apron pocket and finished her rounds, her mind circling back to that folded paper again and again. When the diner finally quieted and the late afternoon sun softened, she sat down in the empty booth and unfolded the note with trembling fingers. The words were simple, thoughtful, and precise. He wrote about noticing the way she spoke gently to every customer, even the impatient ones, about the child's drawing tucked into her apron pocket, about the dignity she carried through exhaustion, how she worked as if her effort mattered even when no one seemed to notice. The final line stole her breath. "This is not a tip, it's an opportunity." Tucked behind the note was a business card and a folded check. The number written on it blurred her vision instantly. Not because it was extravagant, but because it was exactly what she needed. Enough to cover rent. Enough to catch up on childcare. Enough to breathe. She went home that night in a daze. She hugged Ella longer than usual, listening to her chatter about shapes and colors she'd learned that day. For the first time in years, Marisol felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. The next morning, after dropping Ella off, Marisol sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes before dialing the number on the card. Her hand shook. Doubt whispered that it was too good to be true, that nothing came without strings. But when someone answered, they didn't rush her. They listened. Weeks passed, then months. Marisol didn't quit her job. Instead, she learned. She discovered that Grant Hollowell ran a foundation focused on small-town businesses and overlooked talent. He believed dignity came from work, not handouts. The note hadn't been a test of gratitude, but of awareness. Would she notice what others overlooked? Would she read between the lines? She had. Through mentorship and training, Marisol discovered she had a natural gift for organization and leadership. She applied what she learned at the diner, improving schedules, reducing waste, creating a warmer environment. The owner noticed. The community noticed. Years later, Marisol stood in the same diner, now brighter and busier. Ella sat at the counter doing homework, confident and safe. Grant still visited once a year, always sitting in the same booth. He never left a tip, just a note, and every time it reminded Marisol of the truth she carried with her always. Sometimes what looks like nothing changes everything.